To speak to this worthy motion, which provides another opportunity to recognise the vital contribution volunteers make to the economic and social well-being of communities, most especially the more isolated regional communities whose residents rely on the help of each other for services more populated areas take for granted. Mr Speaker, volunteers aren't paid, but it's not because they're worthless, it's because their contribution is priceless. It's not an exaggeration to say that without volunteers, more rural townships would not survive, as its residents, the elderly in particular, would be forced to move if they could not rely on volunteers to bring Meals on Wheels, to drive them to shopping and medical appointments, to call in to check on their well-being, to include them socially at pensioner associations, senior citizen groups and other such organisations which are all run by volunteers. Without volunteers, we wouldn't have events like Christmas pageants, carols nights, show days, and volunteers man museums, visitor information centres just to keep them open and attractive for tourists. Volunteers drive health buses, offer security through community watch groups, neighbourhood watch, church groups support the disadvantaged. Volunteers abound within food banks and charity organisations. It is volunteers who put out fires, sandbag properties in floods, who are first on the scene at road accidents, who drive our ambulances, answer the call from our sick and injured, who are on board sea rescue vessels, who can fundraise for good causes, and it's National Trust volunteers who conserve the heritage and ensure that our past is appreciated in the present and will be remembered by future generations. It is volunteers who work within suicide prevention networks to provide on-the-ground support for the rising number of people who are being impacted by suicide. Progress associations and these volunteers work hard to advocate for and develop town projects that improve the lives of residents, beautify townships, instil community pride and attract visitors to the towns for the economic benefit of local businesses. Volunteers administer, coach, timekeep and score across the many and varied country sport clubs, encouraging health and fitness pursuits for young and old. I'm an APEX member, so I see the difference firsthand that volunteers of service clubs, including Lions and Rotary, make for their towns, and all with the mantra of making their patch a better place to live. All volunteers across all these groups provide vital services and, equally importantly, promote and provide a connection to community that is essential for social harmony. I firmly believe in the research that shows that participation in volunteering results in positive benefits for not just community members who are being helped, but for the volunteers providing the service. All of us have a need to be needed, I believe, and the camaraderie and satisfaction at being involved in your local community does, as research has shown, do much to improve mental and physical health for a win-win situation. This motion provides the opportunity to recognise all the great people in communities across the Narungga electorate and around the state who are a skilled and ready workforce who happily and selflessly devote a lot of time to help others and give back, often all done quietly in the background without fanfare or fame. Just in the last 3 months, I recall formally congratulating Tony and Wendy Marshall for their 10 years of ambulance service, which may well be brought up later in the motion regarding ambulances. Also, Olga Altov for 20 years of service to the CWA, Tim and Sandra Wood and Janet Mill for outstanding service to the Australian Plant Society, the SAC Rescue Squadron's Edithburgh Flotilla for being named most efficient country boat and crew for the 2nd year in a row, Mr Speaker, Stephen Goldsworthy for his Harry Dowling Award for services to York Peninsula Tourism, OIMs for Ian Ravenscroft for long-time volunteer service to cricket, and for Stephen Stock for his volunteer service to the Moonta community, in particular with the National Trust and preserving the wonderful history of the Copper Coast. There was National CFS Service Medals which were presented to Andrew Pearce, Ashley Rowan, Bronte Bruce, Bruce Philby, Chris Johns, David Buzenshot, Gary Bruce, Jeff Pearce, Kelvin Stewart, Noel Rodder, Ollie Werner, Scott Richardson and Stuart Rodder. So big congratulations to those service medal winners. And I think now's an opportune time to mention the work that the Kadina Apex Club is doing, a club which I'm a member of, in establishing a new treetop playground in the main square of the Kadina Township. It's being installed as we speak, and it will be a tremendous benefit for older kids who perhaps don't fit the profile of those that use the current playground installed in the town square and want something a bit more adventurous for them to play on. So that's wonderful, and I'd commend the Apex Club, in particular Jared King and Neil Sawley and everyone else that's helped fundraise the significant amount of money that has been needed to install that particular playground. Mr Speaker, these worthy recipients show the myriad of services that are provided, and thanks to the efforts of volunteers, I say to them sincerely, thank you for all they do. Volunteers fill thousands of roles across the arts, sport and recreation, community services, education and the environment. Of the latter, I recently had the privilege of speaking at the 31st Friends of Parks Forum at Innes National Park. Delegates from Friends groups across the state were in attendance at the event hosted by the Friends of Trowbridge Island and Althorpe Islands. I was amazed to learn, Mr Speaker, that there are more than 5,000 volunteers across SA who do as much work as the Friends of Parks group members in protecting the state's natural and cultural heritage in parks and reserves for locals and tourists to admire and enjoy. I'm aware of all the volunteer hours spent in Innes looking after the flora, fauna and conserving and maintaining all that makes Innes great. A national park that attracts in the vicinity of 120,000 visitors a year, contributing greatly to our local economy. This asset could not be protected without the work of volunteers. And this example of efforts of just one national park within one sector gives a small inkling of the vast value of what volunteers do across multiple sectors in our state. South Australia can be particularly proud, as we celebrate globally today being International Volunteers Day, that we are renowned for spending more time volunteering than any other state, surpassed only by the Australian Capital Territory. The 2016 census revealed that 21.4% of South Australians said they did volunteer work through an organisation or group in the previous 12 months. That is well above the national average of 19% and even further above Queensland and New South Wales, which fall at 18.1% and 18.8% respectively. Studies have shown that volunteers are worth about $5 billion to the state's economy each year, so that's an incredible financial contribution made. And in support of these efforts, in just a small way, those on this side were very pleased to make volunteer screening fees for all South Australians free from 1 November this year, the delivering of another key election commitment. Previously, South Australians were paying $59.40 for a volunteer screening check, which was the highest application fee in the nation. Making this mandatory check free for our hard-working volunteers who give so much of their time is a very fair thing to do, Mr Speaker. These efforts shouldn't come at out-of-pocket expense for the very people who are saving the government so much money by providing the services they do. I was pleased to see the 2018-19 state budget provides an ongoing funding allocation to abolish all volunteer screening fees, with the Marshall Liberal government committing $677,000 in the 18-19 and $1.4 million per year indexed from 1920 in recognition of the huge importance of volunteers and the work they conduct across the state. As volunteering SANNT Chief Executive Officer Evelyn O'Loughlin said at the time of the announcement, the fee abolishment was a win-win for volunteer organisations and individual volunteers. For the organisations, she said, and I quote, "For the organisations, these savings can be better put to use in providing services and resources for the benefit of communities. And for the volunteer, it may mean the difference of taking up a volunteer position or not." I will continue to quote Mr Speaker. "With volunteering playing such a significant part in the life of South Australians, we need to ensure their volunteering experiences are positive and rewarding, and to see this result finally come to fruition is fantastic." End of quote. So with that, Mr Speaker, I commend the motion to the House and take this opportunity to congratulate every single volunteer that contributes time and effort across the state of South Australia to make it such a wonderful place to live, and look forward to continuing to work with all those volunteer groups going forward. Thank you.
Before I call the next speaker, I welcome to Parliament today Mr